came up with an idea of how to make a homemade puller to pull this flywheel. I've got a couple of large machine screws. They've got, not really large, but they've got large heads on them. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to modify these on the grinding wheel so that I end up with a just like one section of this head left that's sticking out, and so that I'll be able to insert this end in there and kind of hook onto the back side through this hole, and then there's the other hole there. So then I'll end up with two screws that'll be kind of like hooked in this way, and then I'll have a piece of flat stock that'll come across here with holes in it for these screws to come through, and put a couple nuts on them. Then in the middle of the flat stock, I'm going to drill a large hole so my puller, my regular gear puller, can push on the end of the crankshaft here. And then the jaws of the puller will actually grab the edges of the flat stock. And then, in theory, that's going to be how this will work. So we'll see how that's going to work out. But first step is I'm going to modify the heads of these screws on the grinding wheel. Alright, just hold the screw in vice grips and periodically quench it while I'm grinding to keep it from overheating too much. And basically that's what it looks like. I ground it to almost kind of like a square, but you can see I left an overhang there, almost like a hook. Now I'm going to go check the... Now I can insert this in. And I got to just fine tune it a little bit. If I grind a bevel on this back edge right here, I'll be able to get it in and it'll work. So I'll just touch it up now. Alright, so I just cut a bevel on the back edge. So now I can get this to hook in. So you see that'll hook onto that edge. Now the question is, will I be able to exert enough pulling force on here before this breaks away? I actually ground it a little crooked there on that bevel, so I may have weakened it a tad more than I wanted to, but I really only want this to work for a one-shot pull. And so hopefully that'll work. So now I'm going to go grind the other screw just like that one. Alright, the second one came out more to my liking. I was able to keep more meat on the screw head, so it should be stronger, and it fits right in. So if you can see it, but basically that's the idea, is that there's just enough of a shelf there to reach in and grab the back side of that flywheel. So now I gotta get a piece of flat stock that's gonna work for my purposes. Well, scrap metal's getting kind of scarce around here. Anyways, this is an old draw slide, and what I did was, this is an existing hole that was there. I just enlarged to fit one of my screws, and then I measured basically the distance between the inside edge of this hole and the inside of the edge of this hole, and then I added enough to account for half the diameter of each one of those screws, and that gave me the perfect spot to drill the second hole. So now I've got two holes that line up over the inside edges of these two holes here. So when I put my makeshift puller jaw screws here in place, I'll be able to then push them up through these holes, put some nuts on there, and they'll be in perfect position. So now I've got to drill a hole halfway between these two holes right here, large enough for the center point of my gear puller to go through and engage the end of the crankshaft here. So I'm going to drill that hole next. I'm going to mark the spot and drill that hole next. Alright, so the original plan was to make this hole in the center large enough so that the jaw, so that the center point on my smallest puller, which this is actually a pretty big puller, but it's the smallest one I actually have, would fit through there. And the problem is it just barely fits, and that's the largest drill bit that I own. So unless I go to my neighbor who's a retired machinist and have him drill the hole larger, I'm going to have to live with that. But then it occurred to me that if I just put this on here like it is now, as I tighten these nuts, that's going to pull up on this. I might be able to pop this off just by tightening these nuts, going back and forth and tightening each one a little at a time, because there's actually, you can see there's room, there's about 1/4 of an inch there that this could pull up before it bottoms out. So I'm going to try that. My homemade puller failed. It bent badly. Rather than actually exert pulling force, it just decided to bend. So the theory is sound behind my design. It's just my choice of materials wasn't very good. So I got this piece of scrap. Not even sure what this was. But anyways, I'm going to see if I can, I don't know if this is hardened or not. I'm going to try and drill holes in this, and repeat the whole process with this more rigid material and see if that works. Alright, this is my second attempt. This ended up being a piece of hardened steel, but I was able to drill it. And I've got this piece of scrap steel girder that I use for various projects wedged in there. So now, theoretically, if I alternate tighten these two nuts, I should be able to pull up on this and pop it free. So let's see what happens. It failed. What happened was my screw head here bent out and popped out of the hole. So I was able to exert enough force on there, but this is what gave out. So, well, back to the drawing board. Well, after the last failure of my homemade flywheel puller, I decided to go online and check into what it costs for the flywheel puller for this. I actually expected something that would have engaged these holes right here and hooked into them and then pushed on this and pulled out. And I couldn't have been further from the correct tool. Turns out this is what the flywheel puller actually looks like. And after I saw a picture of it online, I came back down here and realized that I didn't notice, but there's actually threads in there, and that's what those threads are for this puller, for this tool to engage. So I believe I read that this is supposed to be a left-hand thread. So basically, you just it's as simple as backing this out, and then this will thread into here. I'm going to back it out a little further. There we go. And yeah, it's a left-hand thread. So this is actually tightening in there. Once you engage that, now I just got to put a wrench on here while holding this and pop that right off. Tool's only about $15, so I feel kind of silly going through all the trouble of making this thing when it was just a $15 tool. Well, even with the proper tool, it took my impact driver to take this off. It was really on there. So now, just a matter of pulling it right off. And now we can see the that's interesting. This is the actual windings for the alternator, and they actually only bother winding wire, making a coil around one arm of this. So they probably use this same setup on off-road bikes where they have a battery that needs to be charged and stuff like that, and lights that need to be run and things. They probably have a dedicated real true alternator where they actually wind all of these coils so you can get more juice out of it. But being that this only really needs something to give some impulse to get a spark, I guess they just don't bother. So now I'm going to remove these two bolts right here so I can remove this unit, and actually I'm going to see whether or not I can get these screws out, because it looks like this spider shaped bracket might come out with this attached. So I'll try that next.